You're listening to the Flex Success podcast, where we teach you how to be less shit.
I'm your co-host Lizzy, and this is Dean. We'll be covering all topics relating to health, fitness, and bodybuilding.
Join us as we use our in the trenches experience and up-to-date science to provide you with information that you can actually use.
If you like what we do, be sure to give us a like, follow, share, and tag us on social media. Hey, Dean.
Hey, Liz.
Hi, listeners.
Hello, listeners.
So I'm coming to you guys from the countryside in England. I'm babysitting a friend's house, her 5 chickens and her dog. Dean, where are you coming to us from?
I'm in Texas. Dallas, Texas.
Is that actually how they talk there?
Oh, look, I have no idea, but I'm not wearing a cowboy hat, so I'm not being, completely rude to the Texans that are here. So far, I must say, Southern hospitality, it's a real thing. Everybody here has been lovely.
Is there as much fried chicken as I imagine there to be?
I nearly went to Ricky's hot fried chicken the other day, but I didn't get the opportunity to do that. But I'm going to be very American in a second. I'm going to go and eat at a buffet, Mediterranean buffet, with James Webb. Jay Webby Eats. So it should be fun.
Okay, so for those who don't know who he is, I didn't until the other day. Dean and I have been spending some time apart because he's traveling for work and I'm babysitting a friend's house. And was it just yesterday, Dean? We were like, oh my gosh, we haven't spoken in a while. Let's actually talk about something other than work for a second.
Mm.
And Dean told me all about this guy, and it blew my mind. So before we actually get to the episode, please tell me who he is and what the hell he does. It's crazy.
So interestingly, he's actually an ex customer of mine from Nutrition Warehouse in New South Wales, and we had since connected on Instagram. He's an Australian, and he kind of fell into competitive eating after completing some general challenges around Sydney. Like
Mind-blowing point number one, professional eating. Yes, you heard that right.
yeah,
I
so he
didn't know.
literally earns a complete living currently now, like traveling around the globe, but primarily in America, eating tremendous amounts of foods. For reference, the other day, a new organic cookie shop opened up in America, and for him to promote them, he ate their salted cookie, but he didn't just eat one. He ate the equivalent of 12 pounds, which is about 5.5 kilos. It was 12,000 calories, and it was I think it was something like a dozen or something. So it was like 144 cookies of the same flavor repeatedly in 50 minutes. And yeah, he regularly eats 6 kilos in one sitting.
When you told me this, I couldn't believe it. I went and checked him out on YouTube for the first time, and I thought I had an image in my mind of what he looks like. And that image was a very large, soft person. And he's not. He's like
No,
Bankstown level, kind of lifts for fun kind of guy.
yep. He it's funny because I was telling Liz, for the listeners that are listening to now, that he was training. And after I explained to her what training meant, it actually meant two things. He weight trains because he likes weight training, but he also trains for eating. And that includes tremendous amounts of fluid consumption. For example, drinking 4 liters in one sitting. He trains his jaw by chewing on like a rubber thing so that he doesn't get jaw fatigue. He trains his breathing so that he can eat without having to breathe as much. And so he doesn't pass out. He can just keep putting food down his throat. It is outrageous. I never thought there
And
was so much cool shit to know about
I said
competitive
to
eating.
Dave, how can you cheat in professional eating? And this was a question that you actually asked this guy. And you told me two things. One of them was like you use something to numb your throat so that competitors can just swallow whole without feeling the pain of that. And it's not actually against the rules, it's just frowned upon. What was the second thing you said?
I don't remember the other one, if I'm honest. Yeah, I don't remember. There's lots of things that I think a lot of them do. But there's currently, no super strict rules, just waivers, I think, for their health. When they sit there, they have to sign away to say that, I mean, you can't wear diapers. That's another one. They actually check their underwear at the beginning of a competition because there have been people that
I'm
have just
grabbing
sat
them.
there and shit themselves. Yeah, because the quantity of food is so high, they basically end up having to just pass fluids for a period of time because it's just too much. And they most of the time, from what I understand of him, is he'll drink, say, 4 liters in one sitting when he wakes up first thing in the morning at 5 a.m. And then he'll pee that out for about 2 hours. And then he'll drink another 4 liters in one go. So he gets 8 liters of fluid in the space of like 3 to 4 hours, pees that out. So then he's empty and he's been stretched for the morning. And then he fills that up. So there's this tremendous amount of fluid and tremendous amount of food that has to go through the digestive tract in minimal amounts of time.
BRB, I'm just going to go train on Tim Tams.
So yeah, speaking of supplements, which is I think what we're doing a recap today on
Yeah.
supplements. We're gonna, we're not talking about appetite suppressants. We're not talking about even appetite enhancers, although they may arguably be good for these guys. We're talking about sort of the big rocks of the supplements that we think are worth people taking.
Yes. So just over a year ago, maybe 14 months ago, I remember we were in Porto, Portugal, and we did a supplements part one where we went over sports nutrition supps, what supps are actually worthwhile if you want to get jacked. Um, so we wanted to replay that for you guys today. I feel like that's an interesting segue, Dean, but here we are. We wanted to replay that for you guys today because we still are hearing the same old questions about like, well, what about BCAAs? What about this? What about that? So we've covered it and we're not going to reinvent the wheel. What we're going to do is just replay it
Replay.
for you. Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the cool thing about supplements is most of the time, as fancy as some of the new ones may sound, they don't typically do a hell of a lot more than what's already existing. And you'll hear about that with the creatine discussion, I believe, in this podcast from memory. So,
Yes. Just kind of like looking at food labels, we encourage people to turn it over and actually read the panel, not just read the marketing on the front. So we should be doing the same with supplements. And, for a lot of people, they don't really know how to read the panel, which is fair enough. So you might want to rely on like, I don't know, examine.com. What else, Dean? Like,
uh, I really like Labdoor.
oh yeah, Labdoor, great.
Labdoor's a great one just for checking the quality of the supplements. They're fantastic. But examine.com's the GOAT. I don't think there's anything better out there in regards to a resource that is gone through all of the research to then determine like whether or not it's efficacious or not, and breaking that down into each category.
Yeah. The website's been adjusted, I think maybe like 12 months ago, maybe a bit longer. And things are categorized pretty well. So you can search like, I don't know, if you want to know about different types of creatine or how effective is this supplement? Is it worth my money? So check that out. But enjoy the episode, everyone. Um, and perhaps we'll replay part two. I don't know if there's a good response to this. We'll see.
Beautiful.
So let's get started. We're talking about supplements because supplements is a multi-million dollar industry. Shall I say billion? I'm not really sure.
I would say billion.
Probably billion. Look, this is the type of thing I should Google before we start the episode.
It's
Let's
definitely
go with
billion.
billion.
Like there's Australian companies that would be making hundreds of millions on their own.
Right. Okay. So we're
Yeah.
going with billion.
Yeah.
Humongous industry. And they target a whole range of demographics, right? So there's elderly people, there's people who like to do triathlons, there's bodybuilders, there's, just health promoters, fitness enthusiasts.
The gullibles. Yep.
And yes, very few of these people actually have some sort of scientific literacy to parse out to figure out what is actually are these claims correct? Should I just read the marketing and believe, oh, I can shred 5 pounds in 5 days just by taking this supplement? Oh, testosterone booster, it will make my dick grow and my biceps at the same time. Maybe not. So we're going to go through some different categories. We're going to go through supplements that are generally beneficial, so beneficial for most people. However, because our demographic is mainly bodybuilders and or fitness enthusiasts, we're going to focus on that, not necessarily avoiding sarcopenia or anything like that. Then we're going to go through somewhat beneficial. And when I say we, I mean Dean. Then we're going to go through conditionally beneficial, which means really beneficial under these conditions. Then we're going to go with common, but an absolutely waste of money. So things that people take all the time that have not been shown to have any efficacy in the research. So Dean, kick us off. Generally beneficial. I think we're going to split that up again between training and performance, and then generally beneficial for health. So start with whichever subcategory you wish.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say from the beginning of this too that I want to probably just like surface level cover what most of these things claim and or aren't worth doing, because otherwise we'll be here all day. So we could go further down the rabbit hole, but I don't know if it's necessarily worth it. So generally beneficial if we're talking from a performance perspective. So anybody who wants to be better at any kind of performance whatsoever.
Sexual performance? Academic performance?
Arguably, yes.
Maybe not every okay.
No, arguably, I can make an argument for both of these supplements on those fronts. And that's what's cool about them. In the 2R is caffeine and creatine. You know, caffeine is going to help with focus. It's going to help with maybe getting the heart rate up and giving you a little bit more, you know, a little bit more zing behind your thrust if you really wanted to use it for that. Although I would say you need to keep the caffeine dosage sub 3 milligrams per kilogram if you don't want to aid vasoconstriction or a reduction in blood flow. If you wanted to enhance blood flow, about sub 3 milligrams per kilogram will increase performance and not constrict blood flow. So
give me an example of what that dosage looks like. Am I skipping ahead?
No, I'm giggling because I'm just saying, like, you know, that's my sexual performance macabre for caffeine, but it's the same for weight training. That's kind of the funny thing, is we want maximum blood flow and performance. So what that would look like would be like 300 milligrams of caffeine for a 100-kilogram individual.
How many cans of Coke is that?
I think a can of Coke's about 20 milligrams. I'm not 100% certain on Coke because I've never referenced it for caffeine. But on average, a shot of coffee, like an espresso, could be anywhere from, say, 60 to 80 milligrams of caffeine, standardized. An espresso shot is like a mess. They've seen them as low as 30 and as high as 110, even though they claim to be standardized too, because there's a whole bunch of things that affect caffeine coming out of coffee. I would say this very quickly. If you want to use caffeine for a performance-enhancing, like, ergogenic aid, you should probably use caffeine anhydrous, which is the dehydrated powder version, found in things like no-dose pills for those in Australia, or caffeine powder, or pre-workouts, stuff like that. Because anhydrous is completely controlled. If it says there's 200 milligrams of caffeine, it's 200 milligrams of caffeine. Whereas if you said, I want to have caffeine from a natural source, I'm going to have an espresso shot, or a Nespresso shot being the brand, or any brand for that matter, you're guessing. It could be a huge range.
Yeah.
So from a performance perspective, the efficacious dosage for caffeine that is regularly found to be beneficial for, like, increasing things like strength and power and whatnot would be 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, taken in one full dose at around about the 30 to 45-minute mark before your intended bout of exercise.
I have my hand up like a child. So my question is, does this change dependent on body composition? Like, if somebody's got a really lean 100 kilos, walking around really lean, versus somebody that's quite overweight, that might have a lean body mass of like 60?
Yeah, look, I'm not familiar of any research that has looked at, say, like, those suffering from obesity and caffeine. I would say it's for normative populations. So, like, anyone that would sit within what we'd classify as standardized, like, or the standard deviation of, like, what is considered to be, and I'm going to air quote rabbit fucking thing, you know, like, healthy body fat ranges, or like maybe like a BMI range of somewhere between 25 and 35, because they're typically the individuals that are being recruited in the research from universities to then,
because most people are average.
Yeah, to be used as guinea pigs. So, and that's also the thing. This is why there's a 3 to 6 milligram range, because everybody has their own genetic individual variability with regards to how they tolerate caffeine, and also, like, how fast it's metabolized and how much it affects things like sleep and whatnot. So you have to try and find your dose, but always start at the lower end and work your way up. And I would just say, as a quick little caveat, that if you care for sleep and you're a nighttime trainer, you should probably not consider caffeine as one of your ergogenic aids, because it's got about a 1 hour peak in regards to where it's maximally beneficial. And then for most people, it's still going to have negative effects on sleep, or at least it's going to decrease, or increase the latency period between when you try and go to sleep and when you fall asleep, for about 6 hours after consumption.
It's a long time.
So yeah, like, if you're a 10 p.m. sleeper, you shouldn't be taking caffeine any closer than 4 p.m. And that's even, like, pushing the limit. 6 hours is like minimum.
For sure. Hey, there's actually so much to unpack on caffeine. And then I know we're only on the first supplement and we're like 20 minutes into recording. I wonder if we shouldn't skim over anything and we should just do a part 1 and part 2. So take your time.
Yeah, look, a lot of the other ones don't really require as much nuance, I don't think, as caffeine. I think because caffeine is so readily available and readily used, it requires a little bit more context and discussion around it.
Right. Can I ask you a question about tolerance?
Yeah.
when it comes to, sorry, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but when it comes to caffeine, I'm assuming that regular consumption would increase tolerance levels, therefore a higher dose would be necessary for the same response. What do we know about tolerance?
If you want the like neuropsychological benefits to a stimulant where you feel buzzed, yes, you would need to continually increase your intake to get the same effect. If we're talking about looking at actual performance metrics, though, in the absence of the stimulation that people experience when they first take caffeine, they still seem to perform greater than those that don't take the caffeine. So
Okay.
this is one of the things with pre-workouts and the problems with people that have used stimulants in the past is they're constantly trying to chase what I would classify more of like to be like the
buzz.
sensory side effects and not the performance side effects. If you're chasing the performance side effects, you can almost always just say, take the efficacious dose, done and dusted. If you're chasing the, I want to feel lit up like I'm out on a Saturday night dancing, then different discussion. But you can also you can resensitize to caffeine if you do want that sort of buzz fairly quickly. Usually like an emission of caffeine or even like a 50% reduction for like a week will do a significant amount of resensitization. So you can actually do it pretty quickly. And now if you think about like the periodization of weight training, performance and whatnot, you're not always like redlining your performance and trying to go at it like 100%. There's usually periods where you back it off a little bit, like a deload period. So you could just take the caffeine out for that week. And then you're going to be somewhat resensitized. You normally don't need as much assistance in the start of your training programs. So then you still don't need as much. And then you just save it for the times when you really need it to drive what it's supposed to be driving, which is performance enhancement.
And people are consuming caffeine from other things other than coffee, of course. But if coffee is your mode of administration for caffeine, and you feel like, I don't know, it's that ritual that kind of gets you in the mood for training and gets you in the vibe, you could also switch to just decaffeinated coffee. So you still have that ritual, you still have the flavor, you still, maintain the habits that you're used to, but without the caffeine if you're going through a sensitization phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an argument to the that sort of olfactory response to in caffeine. Like everybody knows the smell of coffee, and sometimes that's just enough to be like, ooh, I'm ready, So that's an absolutely fair point.
Yeah. I remember when I don't take pre-workouts anymore because I abused them at a time, once upon a time. And I felt like I just couldn't have good workouts unless I was like off my tits on pre-workout. But just not having some colored sweet drink, it just felt so wrong. And I just felt like I couldn't get in the zone. So I just went for like Diet Right Cordial or Diet Ribena. Does nothing for me really, but it just helped me get my head right.
Yeah, it's part of the ritual.
Yeah, it's exactly part of the ritual.
Yeah,
exactly.
I like it.
All right, so we're moving on to the next supplement.
Yeah, well, the next one's creatine, which is super simple. Most readily studied, readily available, cheapest ergogenic supplement that you could possibly use. Super benign in that it doesn't really come with negative side effects. The only person that may or may not have consideration for those negatives is somebody that's got pre-existing kidney disease, in which case you would have to speak with your urologist as to whether or not they see any negative side effects to you taking it. Like you could test and measure with them. But major benefit here is that it's your sort of high octane fuel source that your body creates already. And when you take it as a supplement, it gives you a little bit more available. So you should technically have more strength power. And then there's also some potential benefits down the track for like cognitive performance, maybe even some anti-aging with creatine. But you're basically just putting the fuel in the system. So
I love it. So I've just written down 3 points quickly while you were talking. Maybe we can talk over creatine cycling, creatine dosage, and then third point would be types of creatine. Let's start with types.
There's lots of them, but there's only one that is legitimately good, and that is creatine monohydrate, the original. When I say legitimately good, I mean like we can undeniably say, hey, based on the research, this thing works. And it works for 99% of the population. You can expect roughly this kind of performance enhancement. All the other ones have all been designed in an attempt to try and minimize some of the gastric stress that some people would experience on creatine monohydrate. Like it can give some people like a little bit of a funny stomach. There are false claims about creatine monohydrate being fluid retentive, like you can see the fluid retention in your face, or like you become like a bloated water buffalo.
I always hear creatine makes you gain water weight.
Yeah, they're unfounded. You do hold more fluid within the muscle cell, but it's inside the muscle cell. You can't
It's a
see it.
good thing.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
arguably would make you look better, not worse. It's not like, you've come off a flight and you've got fluid around your ankles. That's
Do
not
you
what
remember
happens.
this one time? I don't know where we were going, but we stopped over in Sweden somewhere. My feet on the flight got
Switzerland.
so fat I couldn't, yeah, it was Switzerland. I couldn't put my feet back in my shoes
Yeah,
because my feet got so fat. So we had to ask them for socks from first class. And I just walked around the airport in these like ridiculous socks.
I
Do
do.
you...
I do remember it.
So creatine doesn't do that to you.
No, no, it does not. I remember
That's so
because I
funny.
remember their chocolate was good.
I remember the chocolate was good too.
Yeah. So that's types. Like, stick with monohydrate. It's the cheapest. It's the most tested. I'm not familiar with it, but a fellow that I caught up with actually just yesterday in Portugal, Lucas Aoun. I hope I just pronounced his last name correctly. You probably know better.
AON, right?
Aoun, I believe.
Right.
You should know how to
We
say
had
it.
him on the podcast.
We
Why
certainly
should I
did.
know how to say it?
Because
Because
it's
I have
Lebanese.
brown skin.
No, you're both
Okay.
Lebanese background. Anyway,
So I know how to pronounce all
he
Lebanese
has
names.
he has recently put out some information on a different variation of creatine that is more specific to brain health. I'm not even going to try and remember what it was or talk about it, but it's essentially creatine attached to a particular thing that then has some benefits with regards to like what creatine does in the brain. So if you're interested in more of the cognitive benefits of creatine, check out his stuff. Boost Your Biology is his page. So yeah, shout out
Very
to
smart guy.
very cool dude.
Hi, Lucas.
So
So
that's
dosages?
type dosages 5 grams a day, every day for the rest of your life.
Okay, meaning no cycling.
No need to cycle.
Cycling, for those that are unfamiliar, just means you take it, then you don't. You take it, then you don't. You take
Yeah.
it, then you don't.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Previously, it was thought that like it became less effective over time, but you don't really, once the cell, like inside the cells within inside the muscle tissue are saturated in that they can't take up anymore. It doesn't take much to sustain saturation, of which case then you can just keep using it if you want to saturate the cell. If you wanted to use creatine arguably to like overreach or like make you go beyond what your natural capacity is, then you could cycle it and just use it in the back end of like a training program. But like, why would you want to like decrease your performance for the majority of your program just to make the last bit better when you can just make the whole thing better? So like, but 5 grams a day would do the job. If you had to and you could, it is arguably a little bit more efficacious to take it with either a protein source or a carbohydrate source, just because of what both of those things do with regards to facilitating better assimilation of that particular nutrient. So not necessary, but better.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Was there any
Supplement number 3 for generally? No, the 3 points that I wrote down about creatine was types of creatine, dosage, and cycling, and you covered it.
Cool. Happy days.
Yeah. Happy days.
That's all. They're the only 2 that I could actually pick that I thought are generally beneficial for everyone that I could.
Why?
Yeah, but under the health. So that's under performance. Sorry, I should.
Oh, sorry.
Let me go preference that, because there was nothing else. Like, having worked in the supplement industry, they're the ones that I knew that if I ever sold them to somebody, they could leave and I'd be proud of what I did. Everything else always comes with a little bit of I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, that's good for my sales budget, but maybe not their back pocket or their, okay.
So for performance, caffeine, creatine, there you go tos. For health is a little bit more difficult to discuss, I guess, because you don't typically see the benefits from these as acutely as what you would with caffeine and creatine. Like you take creatine for a couple of weeks, you get stronger, or you get more muscular, or whatever it may be. Creatine gives you the energy. With these ones, you're not really going to notice them so much unless you have a large deficiency, but rather there's 5 of them that I'll go over. Rather, these are things that are likely going to be beneficial because it is consistently common to see them deficient in most individuals, and that you won't typically get them from dietary means, so like from your nutrition. And that's why we're going to say that these are probably beneficial or generally beneficial for everyone. So first one's vitamin D, largely unavailable through food, available through sun exposure, but not everybody gets fantastic sun exposure. And there's also different times of the year that it is completely impossible to get that depending on where you live.
And let's not forget that we're usually covered up as well because we're not naked in the wild. So even if we do get sun exposure, it's probably on the back of our hands and our face.
Yeah, so generally not enough. Dosage for that one could range anywhere from as low as like 1,000 IU up to 10,000 IU. So it's pretty impossible to give a gauge on it. What you can probably say though, and again, like everybody just let me just asterisk this entire fucking podcast. Is like everyone responds to dosages differently to a point. And that is that if you went to your doctor and you got a vitamin D test, and you were below the threshold for what they deem to be like within a healthy range, usually you can raise that range by about 10 points for every 1,000 IU you add in per day. So like the range you'll see for people in Australia, at least, is like typically going to be somewhere between 50 and 100 is where they'll tell you to sit. So if you get your blood test and you're at 40 and you just want to get into the 50s, you only need 1,000 IU and that'll bump you 10 points typically. It is a fat soluble vitamin. So typically you have to be cautious of fat soluble vitamins because if you take too much of them because they are stored inside the fat, they can become toxic if you have too much. However, vitamin D seems to be a little bit different in that it doesn't seem to cause toxicity. So you can actually afford to take more initially and actually load it like some people would have with creatine in the past and then drop your dosage down. But otherwise, unless you're like suffering from major vitamin D deficiency, I would just take the daily dose. I think it would be fair to say that most people can get away with, at least in my experience, looking at various different individuals' blood works, and that is around about the 2,000 to 5,000 IU per day is pretty consistently well tolerated.
I would imagine that people with darker skin that live in countries with not a lot of sunlight are probably more susceptible to vitamin D deficiencies, and therefore this probably, oh yeah, okay, so this would be even more necessary for them. Yeah, because people with darker skin require more sunlight for the same amount of vitamin D. So like a white person doesn't need that much sun exposure, and they're synthesizing a lot of vitamin D.
I could do one nudie run down a popular road and I'd be done for the day. You know?
Whereas I would probably need to lay there for hours.
My white skin would just be like, zap that shit up. Next up would be fish oil. Largely, most individuals, especially in developed countries and westernized diets, don't consume enough omega-3 fatty acids. Fish oil will give you that. There's actually fairly decent research on the like active constituents of fish oil. I'm just going to use their acronyms, which is EPA and DHA. That's the stuff inside fish oil that is important. That roughly above 2 grams of those combined per day has some fairly like significant benefits for individuals even suffering from things like anxiety and mood-related disorders, but more specifically, more commonly associated here would be blood cholesterol management, which is a silent killer. So if you can get that in, happy days.
Absolutely.
That normally will result in taking somewhere in the vicinity of around about like about 7 normal 1,000 milligram fish oil capsules per day. That'll give you 2.1 grams because they're normally 300 milligrams combined.
Have you ever taken fish oil tablets and like burped up this gross taste? Oh, I have.
I got one stuck in my throat in high school. It lodged there. I knew it was there. I knew what I was in for. I went green, ran to the fucking like medical place, vomited everywhere. And they're like, go home. And I'm like, yep. And then I couldn't take fish oil for years after that. I was
that's so gross.
Oh, it was so gross. Thankfully not.
This is probably no substitute for eating foods rich in good fats, in omega-3s.
No, this is the interesting. So this is the cool thing is that like there are other fats that you want to consume as well though. So like depending on like what your caloric standpoint is, like if you're in a deficit or if you're got an abundance of fats available, and you want to have like a diverse range of fatty acids coming from nuts and seeds and oils and all the good stuff,
whole eggs and salmon,
and then you don't want to have it from salmon because you want all those other ones, then you could substitute the salmon at least this way. But I think when I looked at the data on salmon, it's roughly, you have to do roughly around about 150 grams raw weight, I think. Don't quote me on it, but it's somewhere in that range per day, every day to get enough.
150 grams of salmon is about like.
I know, but it does mean you have to consume it every day, which not a lot of people do. And it's expensive.
Yeah, fair.
So most of the time, I think supplementary wise, fish oil is worth it.
Fair.
If you're vegan, there is actually a fairly decent swap, and that comes from seaweed, I believe. So you can actually seek out a high omega-3 fatty acid supplement that is vegan, that isn't fish oil, should you have issues with that.
Perfect.
Can't remember what
Love
it's called. You may be right in that we may just be doing the generally beneficial supplements today.
Yeah, we'll do a part 2. Hey, quick note on supplements. There's a lot of supplements out there that claim a lot of shit and even put a lot of stuff like their ingredients list says there's this much of this particular vitamin or whatever, and it's often not true. So there's this great platform. It's free, publicly funded, which means they have no what's the word I'm looking for? Affiliation. They're an independent platform.
Yeah,
no bias. It's called Labdoor, and they get popular supplements off the shelf and they test them in a lab to see, does it actually have the ingredients in the dosages that the label says that it has. So if you're using a supplement that's quite popular, look on Labdoor and see what it rates as.
and they used to, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but they used to get their funding though via kickbacks if you purchase through their website.
Oh yeah, do that, because you're not paying any more. It's just they get a small percentage and you help fund the platform.
Yeah, it's kind of like self-serving. It's like the companies want to give them the kickback because they want their supplement on the website, but then they also know they're going to be tested, so it's self-serving.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Thank you. You're a good one.
The third supplement in the generally beneficial for health would be zinc. Again, you could technically get this nutritionally from your diet, but again, it's just almost always underconsumed in most people's foods. You don't need a lot of it, but it's involved in a whole bunch of biochemical processes. It's worth everybody having. From a dosage perspective, it could be as low as 10 milligrams a day and as high as 50. You don't want to do mega dosing zinc for a long period of time though, because it can then potentially leach other elements like copper, and then you'd have copper deficiency. So yeah,
would that be considered anything above 50?
50 is like the sort of top end regular daily dose that most people will be fine on. If you were consuming like a lot of like things like oysters and that types of stuff that have like a large quantity of zinc, then you wouldn't need any, or you'd be using very little.
And you would also be disgusting because oysters are gross.
Yeah, as a food lover, that's the one food I just can't get on board with.
It's a sea snot.
It's texturally shit and it tastes like salt. It's just salty water. Like
there's something about oysters that make me angry. They're just so disgusting that I want to punch someone in the face. They're yuck.
I think it makes you angry because it makes me a little angry too, is because people want them to be like almost like the lobster-esque type seafood. They're like,
they're like the posh food. Yeah.
And I think like, how many of you motherfuckers are eating these while blocking your nose, or doing the classic, like, oh, I love oysters, especially oysters Kilpatrick. I'm like, yeah, covered in fucking bacon.
Like, I think it's the bacon that you like, mate.
Yeah. We were talking about in our friends group this morning, you may not have seen it, about someone said, we're talking about wild boars getting caught.
Oh, right? I've eaten one of those. I ate a wild boar in Bolivia. Super quick story. I went on I don't know, do you want to call it a safari? I don't know. With my ex, we went to Bolivia and we went to the Amazon jungle and slept in the fucking jungle. And I didn't know this until we arrived, but we only were able to eat whatever our tour guide caught. So it was a lot of fish and a wild boar one night. Sorry, Dean, proceed.
Well, no, this is a fantastic story because I used the wrong terminology. Joe was actually talking about wild hogs. Now, I think that could just be the colloquial term for Americans. I'm not sure, right?
I'm going to Google it while you tell this story. Hogs the same as
we then talked about like what breeds of dogs. This is important. What breeds of dogs were banned in Australia? Can you go like pigging with dogs, and then can you eat said pigs? And I was like, well, I think most of these pigs, I don't think they don't get eaten. Like the meat is tainted. It's gross. So there was a discussion. There was a discussion around like if it was a boar or if it was a wild pig or if it's a hog, and which ones are edible and which ones are not. And then the next.
How did this come up?
I can't remember. The next
boar is a non-castrated male swine.
Okay, but anyway,
a hog can be either male or female.
Right. The next side shoot to that was, no, I think they are eaten. Just like pigeons, which are considered pests, most people probably wouldn't want to eat a pigeon. And I was
we ate a pigeon in Romania, remember?
Yes. I was like, well, I've had pigeon and it's meh, like, whatever. Like, it doesn't really taste that delicious. Oh, because he said it was delicious. Matt said it was delicious. I was like, And then Joe was like, oh, man, I've had pigeon before. It was delicious as. And then he proceeded to tell us that it was cooked in butter and had bacon. And I was like, mate, like,
cardboard would be delicious.
Again, any meal tastes good with bacon.
Yeah.
So that's how.
Full stop. Okay.
That's how it all. I don't know how we got there, but basically, oysters suck. Bacon rules.
I would have to
the take
agree
home.
with you.
You know.
Yeah, that's the take home. That's the nuts and bolts of this podcast.
Bacon could also arguably be called a possibly beneficial supplement due to its high nitrates, which may help with blood flow.
How would bacon and beetroot taste? Also a high nitrate food. Bacon and beetroot. You reckon it would go?
Sweet and salty. Absolutely.
I feel like it needs some sort of like spongy carrier in between them because they're both such strong flavors. Like, I don't know, bread or potato or something.
Pre-workout meal. Sourdough.
Yep.
Pickled beetroot. Bacon. And a caramelized relish.
Nah, not with pickled beetroot. It's too much.
Okay.
But I reckon I can get on board with sourdough and bacon. But really crispy bacon. Like if your bacon doesn't snap, it is undercooked.
Yeah. Maybe a light spread of like a light cheese. Not too much fats. We don't want too much fats.
Ooh, go with lightest Philadelphia spread. What was like 2.5% fats?
Yeah.
10% protein. Not light yogurt. Philly, but lightest Philly.
Yeah.
Because do you know, I looked the other day, Dean, the fat difference as a percentage from lightest Philly to light Philly, it goes from 2.5% fat to 10% fat.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's like, bro, that is an enormous jump.
Yeah. For those in Europe, you can also do quark.
Quark.
Yeah, quark is. Maybe in other places. Who the fuck do I? How do I know? But quark is also low-fat cheese spread, essentially. Good.
Delicious.
There you go.
I feel like I've derailed us with random
pre-workout sandwich is perfect. The next supplement is magnesium. Similar sort of thing to zinc. Not going to really. Well, it's similar in that its benefits are long listed with regards to what it does in the body. We're talking about muscle function, glucose metabolism, brain function, relaxation, nervous system support, blah, 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 blah. People always quote this number of like, magnesium is involved in over 300 processes. And then the next one will be like, it's involved over 302 processes. And the next one's like, oh, like there's a fucking lot of them, basically.
And people will name 5 and then say etc. because they can't remember anymore. But saying etc. makes it sound like they know more.
Or it tails off. And it also does this and this and this and then anyway.
Etc.
Magnesium's great. Again, like if we're talking about deficiency wise, somewhere in the vicinity of like 300-ish milligrams per dose, anywhere from 2 to 4 times per day, depending on when you want to use it. I will say this, though, it is typically very important to make sure that you get one that is referred to as being chelated. So for that word, for people that are looking for that, is CHELATE. But what it means is like any of the magnesiums that end in ATE will typically be beneficial. So you've got like things like glycinate or threonate or biglycinate. Like that ATE implies that it's chelated, and that just makes it more bioavailable, as opposed to say something like a magnesium oxide, which you just shit a lot of it out. Or even the only one that I would say is potentially steer clear of that does end in an ATE is magnesium citrate. It has like a really, 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 really intense osmotic effect in the stomach. So when you take it, it'll pull water, and you will...
Maybe just explain osmosis for those that don't
just
know what
water flows towards it, essentially, would be the approach thing. And because it pulls water through into that citrate attachment, you often need to empty your bowels within immediate urgency. So if you are backed up...
That is such a polite way of saying you need to do a shit.
Yeah, if you're backed up, take citrate. It'll do the job. But if you want just consistent magnesium benefits, then opt for the best one. Honestly, would be like glycinate or biglycinate. Unless you're going to use it specifically for sleep, then I think that currently the trend is to move more towards a threonate. It seems to have some additional benefits. Again, something that probably Lucas would be very good at covering there as well, and I'm sure he has, for actual sleep support. And yeah, somewhere in that range of like 200 to 300 milligrams per dose is pretty good. I would say that the most efficacious time to take that would be like with carbohydrate-based meals if you're trying to support carbohydrate metabolism, or it would be like post-workout for recovery and relaxation, getting yourself into like a relaxed state, and then similar pre-bed.
Hang on, are you suggesting that people take magnesium 3 times a day?
They could do, yeah.
Okay.
Most of the time, once to twice a day will be sufficient, though.
Okay. Another one.
Last one's protein powder.
Okay. Yeah, right. So Dean and I were discussing what category this could go into, but then there's also the discussion of, is protein powder a supplement or is it a food? I would say that it's
a supplementary
food. If there's 2 categories, it sits in the middle. It's a supplement, but it's also a food. But let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I would say that traditionally most supplements are not devoid of, but are otherwise very, very, very low calories per serve. Whereas protein, because it is calorically far denser, it is classified as food. It has to be classified as food. But I guess it is typically used in a supplementary manner, in that
meal replacement.
It's given or used by people that can't get the protein that they wish in a particular meal from otherwise normal food.
Yeah, I don't want to traditional food.
Traditional is good. Yeah, I didn't want to say natural, because protein is also natural. Like, it comes from the cheese making process. It's just a refined version of a natural ingredient. But it is absolutely food.
And I was going to ask you about dosage, Dean, but I think that might be kind of a redundant question, because basically we all need X amount of protein per day. And maybe we can, we'll talk about what need is in a moment. And how much protein powder you should have will depend on what gaps you're trying to fill. Maybe you don't need it at all because it's easy enough for you to get your daily protein requirements from meat and eggs and chickpeas and some incidental protein and pasta and nuts and things like that. But if there's a big gap between what you're consuming in food and what you want to be consuming, then that gap should be bridged with protein powder.
Yeah.
Which is easy to do, cheap, it's shelf stable. It can be tasty given the right protein powders.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll.
I was going to say, I can nuance this actually, now that I'm just thinking about this while you were answering that, is because of the question of, is it a supplement or is it a food?
Yeah.
So if you were to use it supplementarily, then
I don't know, maybe
the amount that you would use would be far smaller, because you may be using it to fortify a meal that is otherwise devoid of enough protein. So maybe it's a vegetarian or a vegan meal that requires more. Probably not a vegan meal if you're going to be adding protein powder, unless you use pea protein.
You can get vegan protein powder.
Yeah.
It tastes like the earth.
If you were to use it supplementary, then I would say the dosage would just be used just to bump your protein to that meal quantity that you need. If you were to say, I wanted to use it as a food source, and you cared about muscle recovery and decreasing muscle loss and all the rest of it, then I would say you'd want to have around about at least 30 grams of protein coming from the protein powder in order for it to give you a sufficient amount of amino acids to then support those things.
Okay, plus whatever protein might come from the flax seeds in your shake or the milk in your shake or something like that.
Yeah. Then the cool thing about protein powder is it affords you the opportunity to actually have less protein per serve for a maximum muscle recovery or muscle growth stimulating sort of process to be ticked off than what meat traditionally does, or dairy traditionally does, or even eggs traditionally do. That's one of its major advantages, is that it's kind of like you could think of it as like what's the word I want? I was going to say more condensed. It's not really a more potent protein serve than what traditional protein serves provide.
Okay. So this podcast is getting long, so we'll wrap it up really quickly. But maybe you can talk us through types of protein powder, whey versus isolate, blah blah blah.
Oh yeah. So first part, you have naturally occurring caseins that happen in milk naturally, and they're just, you can get a direct casein milk sort of protein powder that will come from that milking process. You then get a further refined version, which would be called like whey protein concentrate, which again, it's the curd and whey. Everyone's heard that old like
Curds and whey.
saying, like Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet eating her curds and whey. Well, whey is the byproduct of the curdling process within cheese. And that's typically like the least messed with version of whey. Like it comes with a little bit more of those sort of like biofactors that you might see, like good healthy bacteria and a little bit more fat and a tiny bit more sugar and lactose and all that stuff. And then they can refine that even further, and they filter it and take more of the fat out and pretty much take the lactose out. Sorry. So for anyone who needs something that's a little bit less lactose dominant, then they can go to like a whey protein isolate, it's called now, hence the name. They've isolated the whey protein. Mind blown. And then there's a whole bunch of other like versions you'll see it. So there'll be like different variations of vegan and vegetarian based protein powders. I would say that if you were going to go down the route of going a non-animal based protein powder, that you should get one that has a combination of different types of protein sourcing in it. So like don't get just a pea protein isolate. You're better off getting something that has like a pea protein and a soy protein mixed with a spelt protein mixed with a wheat protein, because the combination of those typically yields a better amino acid profile. What else is there? And then there's a whole bunch of isolated proteins like soy protein and whatnot too. But most people.
Can we talk about casein?
Casein is the first one.
Oh, we spoke about it. Sorry.
Casein and milk protein. You have then whey protein, which is the more refined. Then you have whey protein isolate, more refined, and then you have non-animal proteins, which would be typically like pea protein, soy protein, rice protein. There's even where does marijuana? What's the word? Hemp protein. There's combinations of all of those. You can also get egg white protein. But most people are going to go for like a whey protein blend, which will have some isolate, some concentrate, and some casein.
Okay.
And they're also the most.
Cool. So maybe the last point I did mention before, that how much protein we need per day, and then I said I'll talk about what needs are. If we're talking about setting daily protein targets, it really depends if you're going off the Australian government guidelines of your RDIs, your recommended daily intake, or you're going with ISSN's protein recommendations per day. So the Australian government guidelines is 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So I'm 60 kilos and I have to use my fingers to count. 36. No, it's not. 0.8 times 60.
Oh, you said 0.6. I thought you said 0.6.
Oh, did I? No, I think I said 0.8. So that's 48
42
grams of protein a day, which is fuck all. But the Australian government guidelines are set in order to help you avoid disease states. And I want to thrive. I don't want to just not die. And also I have high protein requirements because I am using my muscles much more. So I have more to recover from. So if you're an athletic person, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, ISSN's protein recommendations, gosh, I hope I'm not misremembering, his 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, all the way up until 3. And so digging into, well, which one is it? Is it 1.6 or is it 3? If you're in a calorie surplus and you're doing a lot of resistance training, you can go towards the lower end of the scale because you're quite anabolic at the time. Whereas if your risk of muscle loss is increased, maybe you are in a severe calorie deficit, maybe you're not doing the resistance training you should be doing, then we want to be pushing it up a little bit higher. But 3, I don't know, I think 3 grams of protein per kilo of body weight is a lot. Like most people are sitting around 2.2, something like that. So that's 120 grams of protein a day for me, which is just like, I don't know, a chicken breast in my main meals and maybe a protein yogurt on the side. It's really not that much.
The cool thing too, though, is that so for those, ISSN is the International Society of Sports Nutrition. The cool thing too is there's a really good researcher in this domain called Dr. Bill Campbell, and he's sorry, I'm about to reference him, but it was him. And there's also Antonio. I've gone blank on his other name, but he's a part of the ISSN. He's one of the main guys there. And they have seen in the research even up to and beyond just on 4 grams of protein per kilogram can be done without detriment.
But like, let's talk about why we might not want to do that though. Is it Jose Antonio? No,
yeah, that's it.
I'm trying to look at.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, my apologies to Jose if you're listening. is not.
Yeah.
So
Okay, sorry. So what I was going to say is why we might not want to have, what did you say, 4 grams of protein per kilo of body weight? So let's say somebody has, so you would only be going to the higher end of the scale, correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, if you're in a severe calorie deficit. I don't see any other use for going so high in protein. And, right?
Yeah, no, yes is the answer, I think, without having a very long conversation around some of the specifics about protein per serve and whatnot. So like,
okay, sure. We're talking about total daily intake.
Yeah, like protein, you can think of in two. There's 2 major considerations. How much protein do you need in a day to generally offset muscle loss and or grow muscle? And that's the numbers that Liz just gave, like somewhere between the 1.6 to 3 grams per kilogram, right? And then there's also another discussion around how much protein do you need per serve in order to maximize a thing called muscle protein synthesis, which you can just think of as like a growth response, which is both growth promoting, but also muscle loss preventative. All right. And the amount that you need per meal is determined primarily, they believe, on a particular amino acid called leucine being at a threshold whereby it stimulates that to its maximum capacity. And then any more protein beyond that doesn't really do anything significant. And it's about 5 grams per meal. And what that means in real life is about 30 to 35 grams of protein coming from a whey protein source, which is why I said before it's like a little bit more potent, or somewhere in the sort of 35 to 40 grams of protein coming from an animal source. If you were to get it from just wheat, for example, I don't know why I remember this number, but the equivalent leucine required to get from wheat in protein is 100 grams. So like, unless you're going to eat 100 grams of protein from wheat, you're technically not getting a sufficient muscle protein synthetic response from that single meal.
Right.
So
I always find it funny that we can remember numbers like this, but every year we forget our anniversary.
yes, true. You know, it's the things that matter, Liz. What's going to grow my biceps, you know?
Hey, no offense taken. I agree.
So now to come back to the question of like, why would you ever need 4? Well, let's just say we take, and now these are huge anomalies, right? Michael Lucy, we mentioned at the beginning of this, I carbohydrate loaded him in a contest prep at about 1,500 grams of carbs in a single day. He weighed 118 kilos. I'm going to say easy numbers, 115 kilos, just to make this simpler. So just to get him enough protein per meal to decrease his risk for muscle loss, in order for me to do that, to give him like that 30 grams from a meal, he ended up eating about 350 grams of protein in the day. So it's still only just on 3 times his body weight. It's not that high. But 160 of it was coming from non-animal material.
Right, like a little bit from pasta and a little bit from potato. Is that what you mean? Like incidental?
Yeah, one of his meals has 25 grams of protein in it from pasta. Right? So the reason why I bring
high
this
protein
up,
pasta?
no, it's just that he has 250 grams. He has a bag of it, you know, like.
Right, okay.
So the reason why I bring it up is like, technically he needs less protein in that time because we're overfeeding him on carbohydrates, but just by default of the carbohydrate choices, his protein goes up. And then similar in an off season with some individuals that start to get quite muscular and quite heavy in my domain of sort of competitors, I actually tend to find their protein rises beyond the 2.5 grams because of just by default of them eating so much food. And me not wanting to give them an inefficient dose of protein coming from an animal source. And then there's a bit of a flip then too. Like there's a period throughout the dieting phase where you have protein quite high because it's satiating and it prevents muscle loss and all the rest of it. But then there's sometimes this tipping point where calories go so low, carbohydrates go so low, their performance gets really affected. So instead of giving the maximum protein, you actually sometimes a bit better to pull protein down in preference for carbohydrates so that they can perform better. But this is the nuance of shit that people don't need to worry about. But the point is like, someone always wants to like point a finger and be like, oh, you said you only need this amount. Well, yeah, for 99% of the population, exactly what was said at the beginning of this is true. You know, 1.6 to 2.5 grams is plenty of protein. It's probably never a reason for most people to do 3.
But this industry is protein mad, and people are, well, some is good, then more is better. But if we're trying to keep a calorie controlled diet because weight management is important to us, then the more calories you give to protein, the less you have to give to carbs and fats. And you mentioned before, Dean, how important carbohydrates is for recovery and performance and energy. And so there's not like a linear relationship between, you know, protein and the benefits that we get. Some is good, more is not always better. More is just more sometimes.
100%. And like there's a huge opportunity for individuals to maximize their health outcomes long term by preferencing more carbohydrates and more fats, especially when they're getting them from sources that are otherwise like micronutrient dense. Like, you know, if we're talking about like fruits and vegetables, fantastic. If we're talking about even things like grains and different types, sort of like, you know, tubers and potatoes and starches, like all these things also are required. And then the fats, like if you're going to drive protein up to 3 grams, and it means that you have to then eat very low fat meat and very low fat other sources, because the protein drives up the fats and you don't have enough room for calories and so on, so on. You're going to become far unhealthier long term by doing so.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the supplements that we won't talk about today, but was on my list actually, like a conditionally essential one potentially, is like something like calcium as well. Because if you're going to drive protein up really, really high, there is potential that you can leach calcium. So like overconsumption of protein for females, especially throughout their menstrual cycle period, long term, may be actually osteoporotic. You know, like it's going to increase their risk profile there. And adolescents, you know, adolescents that are growing, if we've got these kids that are influenced by big ass bodybuilders eating a shit ton of protein, and all they do is eat meat, and they don't eat dairy because they're fearful of dairy because someone's fucking told them that dairy is bad for them, then we may have individuals that long term down the track that don't have the foresight to consider their health may have problems with bone mineral density. So,
so those on the carnivore diet, really high protein, absolutely no calcium. Also, enjoy having scurvy.
Isn't it fucking hilarious though that one of the major pushers of the carnivore diet is Dr. Paul Saladino?
I never thought of his last name having the word salad in it. That is hilarious.
You want to talk about, just to fucking rant on that for 30 seconds. You want to talk about a dude who's got like some serious cognitive bias. He put up a video going on about how the Hadza tribe don't eat many vegetables, and that the majority of their meat their diet is meat. It's like,
that's not true. I read a whole book on the Hadza tribe.
It's the fucking opposite.
Yams.
Yeah,
that's not true at all. Why would he say that?
Because he lived with them for like a week, and they had hunted and they found meat. So of course they're like, I'm going to eat this delicious meat.
Oh, so he saw what they eat for 1 week, and he just made some general claim about them not eating. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, he is a fucking Fruit Loop.
Absolutely ridiculous. Dean, I would love to talk about what a douchebag this guy is for a long time, but I'm aware that our listeners don't have all day. So we should start wrapping it up. 3 quick segments, something worth sharing. You share something and go.
I just finished listening to the Lex Fridman podcast with Mark Zuckerberg on the current like use and trends of AI at the metaverse. And I thought it was like a very interesting, well-rounded conversation, and it had some relevance to individuals who either may have some fears of AI or don't really know like how it works, and also where it's going. And I quite like Lex Fridman's interview style. He's good. He's slow.
Sometimes I feel like, I know, I can't stand slow talkers. Sometimes I feel like he has really intelligent guests on most of the time. Is it Kanye West? I think he had on. Idiot in shoes.
Yeah,
that was such a boring episode because Joe Rogan. Anyways, it's hard to be boring around interesting people, but somehow Kanye West put me to sleep. I think Lex Fridman sees the best in people and tries to pull on threads that don't exist sometimes. Case in point, Kanye West, and he like tries to have this deep philosophical conversations with a potato, and it just doesn't really work. But no, like generally a great podcast. So sorry, did you explain what the podcast was about?
Yeah, just about the current state of AI and metaverse, Zuckerberg's business, and where they're currently using it, where he thinks it will go, whether or not he has fears of it taking over humanity, where he sees a lot of benefit in it becoming like a customer service opportunity for AI. And he talks about like some people's fears about open source sort of data and then protection of that. And it was cool. I thought it was just like a well-rounded, like good, probably like entry-level discussion for people that just really aren't sure what AI even is and what it does. And good conversation.
So my good friend sent me this podcast. This is my something worth sharing, which is on the same topic. And it was just such an awesome podcast that I wanted to share it with you too. But Dean, you should listen to the one I'm about to share, and I'll listen to the one that you just spoke about with Zuckerberg. The podcast platform is called The Diary of a CEO, and the episode is number 252. It's called Emergency Episode, Ex-Google officer finally speaks out on the dangers of AI. And it sounds like it's some fear-mongering thing around AI, and it's really not that at all. I just think that episode titles need to be really catchy. So there you go. We'll link both in the show notes, actually, so you can just click on it and go from there. But do not replace the Flex Success podcast with these podcasts. We are way cooler and much better. This is just a once-off.
What are we going to call
Listen to it.
Supplements that make you shit yourself? Something like that.
See Lizzy's nipple. I don't know. Lizzy accidentally flashes nip.
Not really, but as a listener, I'm like, okay. Sure.
I don't know. It's catchy. I'd listen to that.
Yeah.
All right. So we've done something.
Nipplegate. That's what we'll call it. Nipplegate.
Less shit tip, Dean.
Don't
buy BCAAs.
Yeah, don't
listen to part 2 for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. No, a less shit tip is don't buy magnesium oxide.
Unless you want to shit yourself.
Yeah. No, I suppose my less shit tip would be like try and use the least amount of supplements possible, because there's only a handful of them that are generally effective. Hence why we've literally spoken about 7 in total today, and one of them was food. So
yeah, spoken about it exactly. All right, would you rather? Am I asking you?
You have to. You know, I've got no creativity whatsoever.
All right, so you're in Porto right now and not really loving it.
No, I am actually.
Oh, okay. That was just at first, maybe.
Yeah, I think the initial part here, I was just a little bit like uncertain, but it's a beautiful city to walk around. The sun's out again. I found my groove. It's good.
KK. All right. I'm going somewhere with this. Would you rather? You didn't love living in Bucharest, Romania, did you? It was grey and miserable. Supermarkets were average. Gym was average. Yeah, okay. Would you rather live 6 months of the year in Bucharest, Romania, every year for the rest of your life, or always have really bad haircuts and eczema all over your face 12 months of the year?
Oh, that's so easy. Bucharest.
Oh, really? But you're living in a place that you don't like for half of your life.
I could make Bucharest work easy compared to...
You can make a shit haircut work.
You don't know how... eczema is fucked.
Yeah, I've never had it.
Like, it's like a constant burn in between itch, in between radiation of... Especially when it's sunny. Like, and if I'm living in places that otherwise got better weather, it's only going to get worse. And then you're going to scratch, and then you bleed. And then
what if it was mild eczema and bad haircut?
Is the eczema? No, the eczema is really shit, man. I don't wish it upon anyone.
Even mild eczema.
A daily inconvenience versus living in Bucharest, Romania, whereby I could probably live in a nice apartment with incredible internet, find a better gym.
A shit place. Yeah, all right.
Look, I didn't dislike Bucharest that much, to be honest. Like, it wasn't as good as a lot of the other places we've been to. But yeah, 6 months of that a year is easy comparatively. I just holiday every weekend, Liz.
No, you can't loophole the would you rather. You have to live 50%
part of
of your life in a
living.
place
Part of living is it means that I get to do things that I want to do on the weekend. That's no, you're living in Bucharest. You can't even go to a good gym. You have to go to a shit one. You know, you're not allowed to eat vegetables. That you've only got to eat the bread. No.
No, I hate when you loophole these would you rathers. It's like, would you rather have one eye? You're like, well, I'll travel back in time and get my eye back. And like, that's not how these work. That's not how these work. Anyways, thanks for coming along for the ride, listeners, listening to our rambles. We will see you in part 2, where we talk about other categories like somewhat beneficial, conditionally beneficial, common, but a waste of your money. All right, over and out.
See ya.